Shall we start in 1 minute? Just please add your names usually. Thank you. Okay, guess we can start. Thank you for joining as usually. Okay, we have the first item of the agenda. As you guys may remember, we used to use some time to triage the issues. I did triage the new ones. There were only a few of them, so it's all fine. There is, however, one issue, and it's related to metrics that I have no idea about. It's about allowing exemplar-only metrics. So I will ask probably somebody from the metrics group to go and triage that. I have no idea. Well, I don't have clear idea about that one. Sounds about right. Anyway, so that's the one. It already has the metrics label, of course, but that's all. The next item is that Riley, well, as you know, he's not here today, but he was mentioning that the metrics spec may be ready earlier than originally planned, which is very good. There's a link to the document itself there. But I was wondering if somebody from the actual group could give us some more of that. I guess I can probably just share my screen and at least try to do that myself. So yeah, anyway, this is the document. As you can see, we have a few dates there. The last day of May, we will be doing, well, this team will be doing an experimental metrics API specification, the release. Then by the end of June, they will be doing the same part for the SDK portion, along with a few pre-release packages from Golang, Java.net. By the end of July, the API specification will be frozen. That's a plan. By the end of August, the metrics API will be stable. The SDK portion will be feature freeze. And finally, by October, the metrics stable. I think that's.
Thank you, Carlos. I think without Riley here, we should move on from this topic. We can perhaps discuss it on.
Item, GMACD, may we close a few stereotypes, please?
Yeah, I've been looking at the OTEPS repo a bunch, and there are at least 12 that are filed last year and older, and I find it difficult to make sense of them. And a couple of them have content that's useful but haven't been touched, and we need to start over, I think, with some of it. There's 3 about sampling. One's mine and one's that's fresh, but the other 2 are old, and it really leads to confusion. So I will propose to close 12 of them, which are all the ones dated in 2020, and we can open them as needed again. If it's about sampling, I can tell you that Lightstep's asked me or us to start focusing on it a bit, and there'll be more to come on that.
That sounds good to me, by the way. Yeah, I was wondering about that a long time ago. So I think it's good to do. Just close them. We can just create new issues for them.
I'll take the action item.
Yes. Is everybody okay with that? Perfect. Thank you. The next one is about samplers. This is something we already talked about, whether samplers are expected to be used by multiple tracer providers. We came to the agreement that it's hard to, like, we should actually allow users to do that, but just tell them, like that's on, you're doing that at your own risk. Is Bogdan in the call? I think we were just, yeah, maybe if you could just check it. If you haven't checked that, please do that after the call. I think that's important to either reach an agreement or, and either merge these or do some change or whatever is needed.
I checked that. So as the interface, it doesn't matter what requirements you have. You can have specific requirements at the implementation level, correct? Like you can say this implementation of the sampler cannot be shared because it's not multi-threaded or whatever reason, cannot be shared between different instances and stuff. So I think it's up to every implementation to decide if it's shareable or not between different trace provider, in my opinion. No matter what we do in the interface, there will be implementations that will not be shareable or will be shareable, depends. So that being said, I think this issue started because we wanted to pass resource to every should sample call. And my whole point is, I think it's a very limited use case where sampler needs to access resource. So somebody can simply implement a sampler that accepts a resource as part of the constructor, and it has a requirement that cannot be attached to different trace providers or something like that. So this case can right now be implemented, and I'm not sure I understand the PR that tries to change that.
I see. Is Christian around, by the way? No, he's not here, sadly. Yeah, if you could just go ahead and write that in that issue, because it's stale. Really appreciate that. And by the way, what you're saying totally makes sense. Although part of me gets a little bit nervous about the idea of allowing every sampler to decide whether it's going to be multi-threaded or not, safe or not.
Multi-threaded, all of them has to be, but shared or not between trace provider, I
see.
Multi-threaded has to be because we have the trace provider making concurrent calls, because that's how the application works. It can start spans in the same time across multiple threads, so it has to be multi-threaded. But the capability of associating to one trace provider or to multiple trace provider, it can be up to the implementation. And I think right now in the specs, if I'm not wrong, we don't specify anything about processor and exporter. So essentially, we let that be the case for them as well.
That's accurate. Yes, that's exactly the case. Okay, let's add a note to that PR. Hopefully we can iterate on it soon. Thank you for the feedback. I will add a note in a bit. The next one is interesting as well. It's about set status. This is a PR we have all known for some weeks now. Nikita started that one. There were some questions from Yuri and Sergey regarding whether it's good enough or not, whether we should actually go for the hooks way. Yuri and Sergey, the call. Well, they're not. Okay, Nikita, sorry, sadly, we have to take it offline there. But yes.
I just want to say one thing. So, in my opinion, that PR a solution to known problem. If there are other ideas how that problem can be solved, then, well, either those ideas can be proposed as pull requests, or they have little value, because, well, yes, idea, but nobody is willing to implement that, there is no solution. So that's my general feedback. If we disagree with pull request, but we are unable to provide better or at least alternative solution because we don't have capacity or whatnot, should we block non-ideal solutions which still has open end, we can iterate them? Or should we just block them and let's wait when we have more time for ideal solution in the future, maybe sometime? And I think that set status pull request is currently one of the good precedents. What should we do? Block it because it's not ideal and we don't have alternative solutions, or allow it to be merged? I don't know.
It depends on whether you can afford to wait or not. Like, is it urgently needed a solution? If not, then that's a valid approach, right? If it's not absolutely necessary, you can say that we're leaving it unsolved. Alternatively, you can say that the behavior is undefined. I don't know if we can do it in this particular case. So you leave it as an open option for the future. But I'm a bit struggling here to suggest whether it is right to wait for this one or no. Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, actually, that was my question. How important it is for you guys in the Java instrumentation world?
How can I put it? That original problem came from a client, from the end user. So our end users have already this problem. So is it important for us to solve the problems or not? I can offer my personal opinion that yes, we should fix that. But I'm not, well, yes, I do. I look from that from instrumentation or SDK point of view, not from specification point of view. We produced SDK, our end users have struggled with that, or instrumentation, our end users have bugs in that. So I want to fix that bug for our end users. If specification leaves that behavior as undefined, I can try to persuade John Watson to implement that undefined behavior in SDK in a proper way, and that's it.
Don't
Yeah,
do
I
that,
don't-
Nikita.
Yeah, yeah, it was my same feeling.
But I like how you think.
Money answers all questions.
No, John, I know. For you, it's other perk, but I will not share that with Nikita. I will not tell him what can drive him.
Vacation in Estonia. Just sending plane tickets.
To tell you the truth, I do like this change myself. I think it's a good change. I think it's a good amendment. And I think it's valid to ask Sergey and Yuri for alternative proposals.
But
Yes.
I read their concerns, and their most concerns, if I read correctly, was that it requires a state, which I don't really buy, because it is a state, don't get me wrong, but it's a state that is not retrievable, which means still doesn't necessarily need to happen in memory. It can happen on the backend side. And right now, the fact that we have a same span ID is the same problem. We still need to have this state in the backend if you are implementing a streaming solution that groups everything by span ID, because you will get every individual event separately. So that state will not be something on top of whatever is needed right now. So I think, Nikita, I think you should explain that this is very similar with the fact that there is a span ID that needs to be combined. Same with trace ID right now. So there is already a state in the backend that needs to happen, and it's not something that we enforce any implementation to have that state in the client. So that's something that you need to explain maybe better in that issue.
I can reread their comments if I get the same impression that they are worried about state. Yes, I can explain that.
That was my impression. Maybe I'm wrong, but that was my feeling.
Yeah, I will reread that, and if I get the same, I will clarify that. Yep. But
Thank you.
But
Yeah.
anyway, yes. So the last comment from Sergey or Yuri was 6 days ago. So I still think it's fair to somehow ping them and ask, what should we do?
It's so the only worry I have is, have we actually tried to use this solution in a number of cases and actually vetted whether it's correct or not. It seems fine to me in this particular case, but what I worry about is, are we like solving some edge cases while creating some more edge cases and so on and so forth? I think that's why there's some nervousness here.
We had 2 proof of concepts in Java and .NET. As far as I know, in both cases, all existing tests continue to pass. The specific user problem was solved, Will that break or not in other edge case? Well, we have to wait for end users to find that out.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a reasonable proposal, personally, what you're saying, which is just that okay is final. Once it's said okay, that it's just okay, and that's that. But-
So Nikita, maybe if we can spend 4 or 5 minutes on this. You can summarize. I was rereading some of the comments, and a bunch of things are about confusion, that why only okay can override error, but error cannot override okay, and so on and so forth. So do you have in mind a simpler solution where, for example, I think one of the proposals from Sergey was unset can be override, everything else cannot be override. Is that a reasonable solution, or that's not going to work?
That's not going to work exactly. The original idea for OK was to allow end user, application developer, to override error status. So we have to be able to override unset and error.
But which one happens first? So in case of auto instrumentation, I think auto instrumentation usually, or 99.99% of the cases, happens after the user code. So for example, on the server side, you have auto instrumentation, creates the span and will end the span, and user interacts with that span and can set the status. So you don't have any problem there, because if the user sets something, the auto instrumentation set of status will be dropped or will not override whatever the user set, correct?
That may be true. I cannot reject that. I am a little bit worried that currently, if we say that we can only override unset, meaning that status can be set only once, then we actually leave to maybe accidental implementation detail that user will always have a chance to set his okay before auto instrumentation. Can we actually guarantee that? Can we rely on that?
The other option is to put a priority or an enum with a set status and say, is this auto instrumentation, is this user, is this whatever, and have a priority based.
Yes, that was another option, to have like the source of the status. Is it user set or instrumentation set? That may work. In my opinion, it's more complicated implementation, actually.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, to the extent that OK is only ever supposed to be set by a user, it already carries that information.
True.
Right. I think a thing that's lacking currently in our implementation that makes this easy is the fact that the application developer uses the same kind of tracer effectively as the instrumentation, right? We haven't, we've discussed like an application tracer or something like that, but it isn't the case that right now the application developer does something to identify them as the user versus instrumentation.
The way how we design the tracer right now is not going to work unless you put all the operations on the tracer. So the problem is the span that we are discussing about is 99% of the time created by auto instrumentation. User just interacts with it. So user will not have a chance. What I'm trying to say.
That's what I meant. When a user's making these API calls, we don't know that they're the user doing it, right? They would have to do something extra, like say, you know, okay or error, and I'm the user. And so that's making it more complicated. for the end user to do that, because the default would have to be instrumentation. You know,
I think what will help a lot, Nikita, here for everyone is, and I think this is the last thought, is if you can put some of the examples, or maybe there are, I need to reread that, but having some set of examples where this can happen. Hey, in case of a Java app where auto instrumentation does this, user does that, this is why it's not working. In case, so like 4 or 5 examples that will explain why one works or the other doesn't.
Well, the original problem that users had, that's explained in the bug issue, which is this pull request.
But that's only one problem. What I'm trying to
Yep.
say is I think we need to address a set of problems and see if the proposed solution works for all the problems, not just for that particular one.
right.
Okay.
Does it make
Okay.
sense?
Yes, I can try to think several different use cases and demonstrate where one solution works and another maybe or maybe not. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I can do that.
That will clarify for everyone if this is generic enough and this is good enough, or if this is just a patch that works for this problem, and then in 2 months we'll have another problem and we'll need to do another change.
Okay, I will try to do that. Yep.
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Really. Yeah. Thank you for all the time and the patience. Very good. We have action item on that one. The next one is about an OTEP, about the, no, sorry. The next one is one PR that you have Bogdan yourself. Yeah, if you could iterate on that, so we either move on or merge it or something, just like a reminder, nothing important. The next one is the Instrumentation Ecosystem OTEP. Similar situation. We had a lot of approvals there. Yuri made a last comment regarding whether we should decide something before merging these, because in his mind, going from an OTEP to the specification, it should be mostly a mechanical change that you don't actually change anything, but probably that's not always the case. But either way, we have to decide some window frame. Nikita, if you could probably just go with 3 weeks, which is what the author said. And
Yeah, in this specific case, I just can accept the recommendation / comment, and that's it. So I will not send my original wording. Sure.
Yeah, and
no
yes,
problem.
yeah, let's go ahead and merge that. But of course, and of course, something related is the question whether we actually are allowed, and I think we should be allowed to change things between an OTEP and making it part of the specification. I mean, that's not ideal, but I think we should be allowed to do that.
Yep.
This part of the specification is going to be marked as experimental, right? So that is completely open for revisiting. You can change the duration, not a problem at all.
Right. Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, a perfect. Yeah.
We have the consensus, I believe, there. Let's go with whatever, is it 3 weeks or whatever that makes people happy, and just merge it. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, Nikita, as soon as you have that, I will merge right away. Or anybody who has power. Thank you so much. The next one is, it's one for the one that Gemma mentioned for probabilistic sampling for telemetry events. I think it's a very interesting OTEP, but it doesn't have enough reviews. And this is not an urgent matter, of course, but there was some interest on reviving the sampling C. Przemek made a comment on that on +1, so maybe it's a good time for doing that. I don't know whether people have some appetite for that.
I certainly do. I've been having some conversations with people at Lightstep who remember how Dapper did sampling, and there's a discussion happening, and I don't actually want to push that on the community here, but having the ability to do basic root sampling with probability and encode the inclusion probability on the entire trace is the first step. And we definitely want to talk about that. So I'm not sure if a working group is needed, but having reviewers and a discussion happening perhaps in Slack would help.
Why do you need that?
So we want to be able to count spans as they arrive. Lightstep has a product feature where we count spans, call them streams. Even if they're nested in a subroot, in a subtree of a trace, each one of them gets counted as the inverse probability of their root. And when spans are unsampled, this is really easy to do. And so there's sort of a twin goal here. We want to cut down the rate, the volume of data being reported. We still want to be able to approximately count it. That's what we're looking for.
So and you need it at every span because you don't want to reconstruct the trace because
that's right.
Because
and
otherwise the information is available if
True.
you keep it only on this route.
And this has caused some confusion in the document. What I was trying to say is there's a concept of inclusion probability, there's a concept of adjusted sample count, and there's a concept of unbiased sampling. And we're going to use this over and over again. There's lots of ways to use this. And what you just described is a totally valid sampling scheme for traces. And I wrote that as an example into my document, and everyone read that and said, that's not what I want. So I want to just get this first OTEP merged just to say there's a concept that we're going to keep using called sampling probability or sampling count. And next, we're going to talk about a spec for tracing and propagating trace probability and encoding it in spans. We may also talking about doing the same for metrics, which is a separate topic.
Okay.
But do we want to start a sampling group at this time? I've been holding off on that because it's felt like we've been spread really thin on the spec front. But if we're having to dig into this sampling work now and pay attention to it anyways, then we might as well start it.
I think it's the right time. I mean, tracing APIs and stuff cooked for a bit, like we have them for 3-4 months already stable. We got a lot of feedback, and I think the major part that is undiscussed is this part. There is also part of this, and probably my fault and related to Josh's problem, is how do we have a deterministic sampling algorithm that uses trace ID, for example. If we want to not use plain trace ID and use a hash, we need to define that hash function that can be implemented across SDKs and maybe even across backends, because they may want to know different things from that. So there are a bunch of things that we need to do, and I think it's probably the last part that we have not finished or polished too much.
Yeah, I'm okay with a working group. I mean, I can try to come, but I feel like there's been a lack of coherent proposals. So you just mentioned something about deterministic sampling, and yet the W3C gave us this is sampled bit, and that was meant to be used to convey whether the sampling decision was positive or negative. But yet there is an entire OTEP about probably like what you just described, and it's pretty confusing to see all these different proposals, and they're all very, very different. It's not clear that mechanism, which is I think OTEP 135, gives you probabilities, which is what I'm looking for. It gives you complete traces, and it gives you less than 100% data, but we want a little more than that.
Yeah, or in also it gives you what Google had with the inflationary thing. So it gives you a guarantee that you can increase sampling and ensure that everything underneath, like the subtree, will be sampled if you have a deterministic algorithm. Anyway,
Right. There was also this, and it was discussed in a comment thread of one of my OTEPs, which was by a Google engineer from back then, remembering that there's this boosting probability logic that happened. And I don't know if Google still does that internally. I'd love to know, but it's sort of saying that I want to have a minimum probability for my subtree. And if I get an incoming trace, whether it's sampled or not, I need to know its probability, because if it was sampled, I'm going to keep sampling. And if it wasn't sampled, I need a conditional probability equation to adjust my own and decide to maybe start sampling my root. Remember that? It was awful, but that's what Dapper did. And someone's going to come and ask for that.
No. But I removed it. We can discuss. I did it differently. So the bit is enough to know if the parent sampled or not. And now, if you have a deterministic algorithm across all the SDKs, if you have a higher probability, and based on a deterministic algorithm that Google used, you will guarantee that you will sample only if you have higher probability than the parent. So you don't need to propagate just for that. You need to propagate for the counting problem, which is true, but not for that problem to solve.
Okay. Sounds like we need a group to discuss this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's the area of tail sampling, which a lot of people are asking for, and we have tail sampler in OpenTelemetry collector contrib, but there were some discussions about enhancing it or changing it, or like making some revolution here with several ideas how to tackle that, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted this working group. So I feel that we have several things to cover here, and maybe it's worth having.
Yeah, my proposal actually incorporates the idea of tail sampling by allowing for a zero inclusion probability, because when you have tail sampling, you often buffer things until the point where you have to throw them out that you didn't know when you started what the probability was. So the probability changes over the duration of your tail sampling. And that's why you need to go back to the root and assemble a trace, because you can't propagate the correct probability because of your tail sampling decisions.
Okay, so let's have that group, but in order to solve that problem, we probably need people from the collector, and we need some other people, not only from the SDK. So yeah, I think it's a good thing. Ted, I know you led that, so maybe you want to start it.
Yeah.
FYI, next month I will be on a European time zone because I need my passport. So if you need me, it has to be morning for Europe time zone.
I think there's a lot of Europeans interested in this thing. Unfortunately, all the people who responded to time zone requests were like all over the map. So I think we'll just try to run it in our usual kind of morning time slot, and hopefully people can come.
Sweet. Thank you for that. And the last item we have in the agenda is about Josh. Oh, actually, we have two more. Josh, yeah, please. The other Josh Sured.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted and texting. Okay, so real quick, basically the data model SIG has been putting together a document around the OpenTelemetry protocol. This document is designed so that people can write metrics exporters. It's designed so that people can write metrics importers or receivers, if you will. And it's designed to like predecess, I don't know, some word. Precede, there we go, that's a word. The API and the SDK, the actual SDK exporter, right? Of like, this is how you get metrics into OpenTelemetry. And what like it's a little bit more refinement on the protocol. Okay. Now the document lives in the specification. It's marked as beta. Okay. What I want to know is, and I want to talk through the process of making it stable. We had changed the process around like OTEPs and stability and that sort of thing. And I feel like this is something that perhaps we weren't doing correctly. So the real question is, what do we do to go forward? And I have some tentative proposals. So we have one open pull request from Josh McDonald, which I think represents the last major component for this bit of the specification before I'd like to try to declare what's in there stable and ready for folks to use. Again, we already have the protocol buffer definition. So in terms of like, is there an implementation of this? Well, kind of. I mean, it's hard to like, the specifications for people to write implementations and describe what's in the protocol buffer. So we have the protocol buffer, right? So I'm not sure what process we want to take here, but what I'm proposing is we get this last PR from Josh McDonald merged, and then I'd like to write an OTEP that will mark it as stable and go through some round of review there. We have the SIG currently is going through a process of just looking through and trying to use it to do little implementations and prototypes. to see if maybe there are aspects of the spec that are unclear that we can flesh out. But from the standpoint of, do we think we can implement what we've already implemented with the spec? Yes.
Are you asking questions?
My question is, does this sound reasonable? Does anyone want to see anything else done? Like, so if I make an OTEP to mark this as stable, post Josh's last PR, right? What do I put in the OTEP? Do I put the whole specification that exists in our spec? Do I just put a proposal to mark it as stable? And then secondarily, going forward, I just want to confirm that I understand the process correctly of, if we want to make changes to the specification, first we want to see an OTEP proposal around the data model, where we discuss the OTEP and we get working prototypes of the proposals. And then once those are done, we'll actually make a change to the specification. So like, I need to shift the mentality of how the data model SIG works, because right now they've been working primarily in the proto and the spec repo. And we need to move them into experimentation and OTEPs. And this is the first instance of it. So I just want to make sure that we like kick this off right and set a good example.
First, the way you're describing it, at least sounds like there is no certainty that the specification is what we want to have. Is there still a need for prototyping and experimentation?
I don't think I'm doing it justice. I think what we have specified is actually pretty darn good and pretty stable. What I need here is, there are aspects of Prometheus that we've never mapped into OpenTelemetry. And what I'd like to do is make those require a formal prototyping, implementation, and OTEP phase before we just throw them at the specification. And so I want to take what we have today, which is basically what the current protocol means, and stabilize it, right? Which, if you look at what's in the document that I have linked, there's a few to-do sections that, again, are going to be filled out in this last PR removed, that are more around how to make use of the data and not around what the data is. If you look at the definitions of like histogram, number, data point, those kind of things, that's not changing. That's stable. That's fine. I think we've done enough research into that to know this is what we want as our foundation, right? It's what I want to do is figure out how do we make changes to that foundational model on a stable thing. So I want to get what we have marked as stable, and then I want future work to actually happen in OTEPs and in prototypes, right? That's kind of the goal of what I want to do here. So how do we take this current specification as it exists and get this thing marked stable, so that then we can do prototypes in prototype way? I'll give you some examples of stuff coming down the pike. There's a group working on multivariate metrics and like possibly looking at columnar data representation. There's a group of people looking at histogram bucketing, and there's a proposal for a new histogram bucketing mechanism, right? I want to find a way to enable those prototypes to happen against something that's stable, instead of just continuing like in beta phase forever. Like, let's get this thing marked stable, and let's move to this OTEP model so that we're operating the way that we want the process to go going forward.
Do you see the possibility that the prototypes can uncover things that will require breaking changes through the specification? There's no going back, right? If you mark it stable, you can no longer make those breaking changes.
Agreed. I think the prototypes could reveal a different way of representing data, and we're just as unsure as we've always been with everything. I mean, that could happen with traces. I'm pretty sure that the way we're representing data with metrics will solve all of the pending releases of the API and SDK and Prometheus things that we need today. That's not to say there's going to be some different alternative representation that we decide to also allow in a non-breaking way. But what we have today, I don't see breaking.
Yeah, I'd like to add just a little bit of confidence here is, when the project started, we were trying to design APIs and SDKs. And as we moved along for these 2 years, this collector just became a driving force for us. And we had to design a data protocol that was to meet the industry. And it had nothing to do with APIs and SDKs at that point. It had to do with transferring meaning about telemetry. So perhaps we didn't do things in the right order. But for the last year or so, and I think many of us have been talking and working and having one-on-ones to talk about collectors, the import process for legacy data pipelines, telegraph data, data from graphite sources, data from Stastity sources. And I have been working on a Prometheus sidecar, which is very in-depth and a very productionized transfer from Prometheus data model into OTLP. And so part of these OTEPs that I'm writing are because we have prototyped this and we put it in production. And I'm looking at the stream of, staleness markers and saying, I don't know what to do with these now. And that's why there's a PR. So I was on the fence last night about putting that last PR into an OTEP because there are options. And I will accept responsibility. I'm putting my first opinion into a PR instead of 3 opinions into an OTEP, and maybe you can tell me to do it the other way.
Okay, but the point being, for push-based SDK protocol, we don't we have committed in the data model, said we're not going to break what we have, and we think it represents what we need from our metrics API exactly right now. We're fine. Like that, we don't see changing, right? Now, as we start adapting other metrics protocols and pulling stuff in, there might be like additions that come, and that's fine. We're going to do it in a non-breaking way, and we're not worried about not breaking those things. So I can give you examples if you want to know some of the stuff we're discussing, but that's basically where the SIG stands today. Is we want this current model to be stable, to not change, and map as much as we can into it. And there's going to be a few things that don't fit that we're going to have discussions about and possibly add, but those should be prototyped and in an OTEP. And I gave you the first example is this histogram bucketing thing. There is a non-breaking way we plan to represent this. We're prototyping that now, right? But that's not, I want to get the current data model marked as stable. So as we release the SDK and the API for metrics and go into beta, you have this stable data model you're working off of that people can target, and everything else is an experiment, and it's very clear, right? The way, so that we don't run into what we had before. Like, I know that we're trying to move to a different model here. So if I made it sound like we're not sure about the data model, no, the 3 main types that we have right now, very sure of, right? That doesn't mean there won't be additions, but these 3 types, we're very sure of these will be stable. I think metrics are more complicated than traces just because you have a lot more math that people like to throw at it.
We know additive changes can happen. That's completely fine.
Yeah.
So I guess if you feel certain, I personally would not be against if we mark this particular data model part as stable. If you would like to be more cautious, but still recognize the fact that you achieved a certain milestone, and now it is worth having implementations based on that milestone, maybe we invent a status which is in between the experimental and stable. We call it, I don't know, beta. We don't have that formally defined anywhere, but we can have a beta state, right? That's still a recognition that you have achieved this milestone, and now people can go ahead and implement whatever is in the specification, yet still give yourself the flexibility to still, if there is something uncovered, something unknown, to make that breaking change if necessary. That's also a possibility, depending on how confident you feel about the need or not having the need to make that breaking change.
I mean, flatly, I don't want any more breaking changes to the data model at all.
But proto is stable. So
it's already stable. Yes, that's correct. But there
Yes.
are the other parts, the event stream and the time series. There's three bits, right, in that data model. The middle portion is already marked stable because it's in the proto
So
and it's stable.
the data model talks about an event stream conceptually. It talks about a time series conceptually, and it's meant to guide you into how to map between the two. Like,
Yeah.
it's a guide. It's not. If you look at how the wording is in there, it is not firm. Nothing. These are all kind of like suggestions for how to deal with problems. So like the problem with the data model document is it's a specification, and it's an aid for implementation.
Right.
And the majority of that document is this aid for implementation. That we're basically getting to the point where we feel that this covers enough of the scenarios that we've had to deal with in implementations today, with like the Stastity receiver, with the Prometheus receiver, et cetera, right? That we think this is ready for people to read, but I want to get the document itself marked as stable, so it's very clear the data model stable and future data model work really needs to happen in OTEPs.
Maybe we can clarify at the top of the document. We can put it stable and say the data model is stable, but here are some recommendations that may change because they are just like, I don't know.
I can actually, that's an option here, is I can go through section by section and define each section as stable or unstable, the way we have in the other documents, and that's fine too. I can even actually clarify in the data model document the sections which are more about guiding you for interacting between your, event model and your time series, and the ones that are specified, like here's what the data model means. That's fine. That's another option.
The other option is split the document into two. A document that is pure data model document, explanation of what is a sum and stuff that we definitely want to mark as stable. And the other one, just say guideline or whatever we call it for mapping. And by the fact that it's called guideline, even though you say it's stable, it's just a guideline. Like it's not something that users should take as specification, and that guideline can be changed because it's a guideline. Like,
okay,
that's another option if you want to consider. I mean,
yeah, I think we might do that. Again, if you look at the verbiage in the document today, it is very clearly not using must in a lot of what it says. And then there's sections where it really does use must because, there's some must there.
Mm-hmm. If the language is flexible enough that you can bend it the way that you need it to be bended, then I say go for it. I don't see the reason.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, feel free to review it and tell me what you think if we've missed anything major. But I'm feeling pretty confident right now. Yeah.
I would still split the document because people will ask, tell me what's your data model, and we give them this document and say, this is the explanation of the data model, same as Open Metrics. And then there is a guideline of how to map different concepts on this data model that are not necessarily related to the data model per se, it's just concepts or things about the data model.
Okay. All right, that's fair. So we can split out the how to implement a receiver / exporter from the actual data model spec itself.
Yeah.
I think initially what I'll do is just do that with headings and sections and send that as a PR, and then we'll go from there. Does this need a formal OTEP review process to come to get the stable marker on this? I'm just curious.
I think it would have, so in a lifetime, this OTEP should have been done before we started this. But now, just trying to retroactively to follow the process, I don't feel necessarily confident and comfortable doing that because it's just unnecessary work. It should have been done before. Like when we started 2 years ago, we should have been on OTEP. Hey, we want to support metrics. Here is a proposal of the data model. Here is a proposal of how to do different things. And then from there, refine the proto, refine the specs, and so on. I think Tigran did something similar for logs, very close to what we want. He started with an OTEP for logging, why logging is important, blah, 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 and a bunch of things. And then from there, derive the data model, derive a specification. So I think that's the right process to do. But now going back to put an OTEP just to mark it stable, it's just a word. Like what would you write in an OTEP to convince me that it's stable or not? Or what exactly I would read in that?
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So if I send a PR to split this up, I'll do the split up first and then the stability second. But that PR just goes through the normal spec process.
Yes.
Whatever you wanted to put in the OTEP, put in the PR description. That should be sufficient, I think.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. And then future work we'll do in OTEPs.
Yeah. I do want to point out, I think there is our process is a little fuzzy when it comes to proto changes, in the sense that you've got OTEPs, you've got the spec, and you've also got the proto repo. And we don't, generally speaking, want to do a lot of experimental thrashing about in the proto repo, but that's where we tend to do the work. And it is actually a little fuzzy about what gets written down in the spec versus what goes into the proto repo and where the source of truth is there. If you look at what we have in the spec around tracing, metrics, logging, it's not exactly even what we've written down there. Like what we've written down for logging in the spec is pretty different from what we wrote down for tracing. And we tend to do the work in the proto repo. So I just want to point out that that part of the process is a little muddled.
That's a good point. That's also what you told about, Bogdan. So my perspective is that the proto repository is part of the specification. It's the more formal part of it. It's a machine language part of it, but it is actually part of the specification. And if you look into the protocol section of the spec repo, it links to the proto repository. It says, go look at the definitions there. That's the source of truth for the protocol, right? And I think data model wise, it can be the same. We can formally say that proto is the formal definition of the data model, and it is part of the specification. And you're right that we don't do that today. That's probably an omission. We need to fix that.
Yeah. And just like on a practical matter, we do need to just make sure those two things stay in sync with each other. And
I don't think we do a whole lot of duplication there. In reality, we don't define things that are in the proto repository in the specification. Mostly they are kind of.
I mean, if you look at the what's written down for the logging, for example, like it pretty much describes the data model.
Yes, I'm wrong. You're actually.
But I'm saying, but if you look at what we wrote down for tracing, we actually describe a protocol. We don't describe the data model very much, but we do a lot of work describing the protocol. So
it's not very consistent. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see why it's a little confusing. I don't know how much work we want to spend retroactively normalizing that, but
I think
when we're adding this metric stuff, that's why it's worth asking, like, what part of that we write down.
I think it will work. So we have a data model document for logs. We now have one for metrics explaining this. I think it's worth going back and do the same thing for tracing at one point. Because
I think it's helpful because in the spec we can explain what these things are in a way that the proto definitions don't really do. So.
Yeah, and that's what we did with metrics. Like the fact that we can cover the use cases of how to import in and import out, like it just gives you the flexibility to really dive into how to use these things. Because if you just say, this is the start time, it means this. Okay, well, I'm dealing with this format. What the hell do I do? How do I map it in, right? That's where we spend most of our verbiage in the data model spec.
Yep.
Okay, yes, Bogdan is saying goodbye. Yeah, just Anthony, yeah, we are having the next release next week, early June. Let us know if there's a problem with that or you need something from us. But yeah, next week should be happening.
No, next week I think it's fine. We're looking to make an RC for the Go SDK soon. And if we're ready this week, I would like to do it. But there are also changes for the schema URL that we might want to land in there. So I think we'll have a discussion in the Go SIG whether we want to get those in and anticipate the upcoming spec or wait until the spec is out. And if it's coming out next week, that may be fine.
Yep. Yeah, we are doing a monthly release for now, so I hope that's okay for the time being. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Very interesting topics. See you soon. Stay safe. Ciao.